Jamal Washington sat in his cramped studio apartment, surrounded by canvases of all shapes and sizes. The air smelled of turpentine and linseed oil, and the floor was speckled with paint splatters, a chaotic mosaic of his dreams and frustrations. Jamal had always known that being an artist wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected the barriers he faced to be so steep, or so personal. From an early age, Jamal's world was shaped by color and form. As a child, he would sit for hours with a sketchpad, capturing the world around him with a precision that astonished his teachers. But as he grew older, he realized that raw talent wasn't enough. The art world was as much about connections and perceptions as it was about skill, and for someone like him, a young black man from the south side of Chicago, those doors often remained firmly shut. Jamal poured his heart into his art. His work was bold and unapologetic, blending vibrant Afrocentric themes with contemporary styles. Each painting told a story, the struggle of his ancestors, the resilience of his community, and the beauty of a culture often overlooked. Yet, no matter how powerful his pieces were, gallery after gallery rejected him. "They're just not the kind of thing our clients are looking for," one gallery owner had said, barely glancing at his portfolio. Another had muttered something about trying again when your work matures, as if Jamal's lived experiences weren't valid enough to be considered art. The rejection letters piled up, each one a reminder that he didn't fit the mold of what the art world deemed acceptable. But Jamal wasn't one to give up. He knew his worth, even if others didn't. One fateful afternoon, Jamal decided to try his luck at the Belmont Gallery, one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. The gallery was known for its high-end clientele and its exclusive nature. Only a handful of artists ever managed to get their work displayed there. Despite the odds, Jamal was determined to give it a shot. As he approached the gallery, the stark white facade loomed over him, its minimalist design a sharp contrast to the vibrancy of his work. The interior was no different, clean lines, muted tones, and an air of cold detachment. Jamal felt out of place the moment he stepped inside, but he pushed the feeling aside and approached the reception desk. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone indifferent. "Yes," Jamal replied, adjusting the portfolio under his arm. "I'd like to speak with the owner about displaying some of my work." The receptionist's eyebrow arched slightly, but she said nothing as she disappeared into the back room. A few moments later, Karen Monroe, the gallery's owner, appeared. She was tall and impeccably dressed, her sharp features framed by a perfect blonde bob. Her eyes scanned Jamal briefly, before landing on the portfolio he held. "You're an artist?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Yes," Jamal said, meeting her gaze. "I'd like to show you some of my pieces." Karen sighed, clearly unimpressed. "We're very selective about what we display here," she said, crossing her arms. "Our clients expect a certain level of sophistication." Jamal opened his portfolio, carefully laying out a few of his favorite pieces. Each one was a masterpiece in its own right, vivid, emotional, and deeply personal. But Karen barely glanced at them before wrinkling her nose. "These are colorful," she said, her tone condescending. "But they're not exactly what we're looking for. We cater to a more refined audience." Jamal's heart sank, but he kept his composure. "If you look closer," he began, pointing to one of the paintings, "you'll see the layers of texture and symbolism. This one, for example, represents..." Karen cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm sure they mean a lot to you," she said, her voice saccharine, "but our clients wouldn't understand pieces like this. They're used to more traditional art." The words stung, but what hurt more was the way she said them, as if his work wasn't worthy of being seen, as if he wasn't worthy of being taken seriously. "Thank you for your time," Jamal said stiffly, gathering his portfolio. Karen didn't bother to reply, already turning her attention to a potential buyer who had just walked in. Jamal walked out of the gallery, his head held high despite the knot forming in his stomach. That night, Jamal sat in his studio, staring at the blank canvas in front of him. He thought about giving up, about how much easier it would be to find a steady job and leave his dreams behind. But then he thought about his community, about the kids who looked up to him, and about the stories that needed to be told. No, he muttered to himself, gripping his paintbrush. They're not going to stop me. He dipped the brush into a pot of crimson paint and began to work. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks as Jamal poured every ounce of his frustration and hope into his art. The result was his most powerful collection yet, a series that captured the pain of rejection and the resilience needed to overcome it. Though the memory of Karen's mocking words lingered, Jamal used them as fuel to keep going. He might not have been what the Belmont Gallery was looking for, but he knew there was a place for his art. And he would find it. Little did he know, his persistence would soon pay off in ways he could never have imagined. The streets of Chicago were alive that afternoon as Jamal pushed a small cart loaded with his latest paintings toward a community art fair on the city's west side. The air buzzed with the energy of local musicians, food vendors, and artists displaying their work on folding tables and makeshift easels. Jamal had been attending these fairs for years, not because they promised much financial reward, but because they were one of the few places where he felt seen. His booth was modest, a simple table draped with a fabric patterned in bright African prints. On it rested a selection of his latest pieces, bold, colorful works that danced between traditional African imagery and contemporary abstract forms. They were unapologetically his, filled with the stories of his upbringing, his ancestors, and the struggles he had faced. But the fair wasn't a guaranteed success. People often stopped to admire his work, maybe even complimented him, but rarely bought anything. Still, Jamal showed up, every time, hoping that maybe this time would be different. As the afternoon wore on, Jamal's hope began to wane. Most of the fairgoers were just passing by his booth, their interest fleeting. He adjusted one of the canvases on its stand, trying to fight off the creeping sense of defeat. "Excuse me, is this your work?" The voice startled him, soft yet commanding. He turned to see a woman standing in front of his table. She was dressed elegantly in a tailored burgundy coat, her hair in tight silver curls. Her eyes were sharp, scanning his pieces with an intensity that made Jamal's heart race. "Yes," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "These are mine." The woman nodded, stepping closer to examine one of the larger pieces. It was a vibrant painting of a young black boy standing under a tree, his shadow stretching behind him to reveal the silhouette of a man in chains. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, her fingers tracing the air near the canvas, careful not to touch it. "The emotion, the story, it's all here." "Thank you," Jamal said, his heart pounding. He wasn't used to such genuine praise, especially from someone who looked like she knew what she was talking about. The woman turned to him, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I'm Lisa Reynolds," she said, extending a hand. "I collect art, and if I'm being honest, I've never seen anything quite like this." "Jamal Washington," he replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for stopping by." Lisa smiled. "I don't just stop by when I see something this good. I want to know more about you. Where are you showing your work?" Jamal hesitated, feeling the sting of his recent rejection at the Belmont Gallery. "Mostly community fairs like this," he admitted. "I haven't had much luck with galleries." Lisa frowned, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "You mean to tell me no gallery has picked you up yet?" "No, ma'am," Jamal said, trying to keep the bitterness out of his voice. "Well, that's about to change," Lisa said firmly. She handed him her business card. "I want to help you. Your work deserves to be seen." Over the next few weeks, Lisa proved to be true to her word. She invited Jamal to her spacious home in Lincoln Park, a far cry from the cramped studio apartment he was used to. Her walls were adorned with pieces from some of the most renowned Black artists in history, from Jacob Lawrence to Kerry James Marshall. "This," Lisa said, gesturing to the collection, "is what I've dedicated my life to, lifting up artists who tell our stories. And you, Jamal, have a voice that needs to be heard." Lisa became Jamal's mentor, teaching him not only about the business side of the art world but also about the importance of self-worth. She introduced him to her network of collectors, curators, and critics, each of whom was equally captivated by Jamal's work. Eventually, Lisa arranged for Jamal to showcase his pieces at an exclusive exhibit in the heart of downtown Chicago. The event was held in a luxurious gallery, its walls cleared of all other art to make room for Jamal's collection. He spent days preparing, carefully selecting the pieces that best represented his journey. When the night of the exhibit arrived, Jamal stood nervously in the corner, watching as a crowd of well-dressed attendees flooded the gallery. He could hear snippets of conversations as people admired his work. "This is breathtaking. The layers of meaning here are incredible. Who is this artist? I need one of these for my collection." Jamal was overwhelmed, not just by the praise, but by the sheer volume of it. He had spent so many years fighting to be seen, and now he was at the center of it all. As the night went on, collectors began placing bids on his pieces. One painting sold for $50,000. Another went for $80,000. By the end of the evening, every single piece had been sold, with total sales exceeding $2 million. Jamal could hardly believe it. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a sensation. Critics hailed his work as revolutionary, a bold new voice in the art world. Articles were written about him, and interviews were requested. Overnight, Jamal's life changed completely. Despite his newfound fame, Jamal didn't let success change him. He remained humble, driven by the same passion that had carried him through years of rejection. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. For every door that had been closed in his face, Jamal now saw an opportunity to open doors for others. And as he stood in his studio, surrounded by blank canvases, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to waste it. Jamal Washington's life had undergone a transformation so dramatic, it felt surreal. From struggling to pay his rent in a tiny, paint-splattered studio, he now found himself living in a spacious loft downtown, its walls adorned with his own masterpieces. His work was being celebrated internationally, his name splashed across the pages of Art Digest and the New York Times. Collectors clamored for his pieces, and museums requested his presence at exclusive galas. But Jamal's newfound wealth and fame didn't distract him from his true mission. As much as he enjoyed his success, he couldn't forget the many times doors had been slammed in his face. He thought of other talented artists, especially those from marginalized communities, who might never get the chance he had, simply because they didn't have someone like Lisa to guide them. Jamal decided to use his influence to create change. He began sketching out plans for a gallery that would celebrate underrepresented artists, those whose voices were overlooked in the elitist art world. His gallery would be a space where art could thrive without prejudice, where every artist, regardless of their background, would have the opportunity to shine. One day, while reviewing potential properties for his gallery, Jamal's assistant brought up an intriguing option: the Belmont Gallery. "That's Karen Monroe's place, right?" Jamal asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," his assistant replied. "It's struggling. Apparently, she's been trying to sell for months, but no one's biting. Would you like to take a look?" Jamal leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He hadn't thought about Karen in months, not since the day she had mocked his art at her gallery. But the idea of revisiting the Belmont Gallery, this time as a potential buyer, intrigued him. "Set it up," he said. A week later, Jamal stepped into the familiar white facade of the Belmont Gallery. The interior was just as he remembered, sleek, minimalist, and devoid of warmth. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his polished appearance a far cry from the struggling artist Karen had dismissed. Karen herself appeared moments later, her sharp features and blonde bob as meticulously maintained as ever. She approached Jamal with a practiced smile, clearly mistaking him for another wealthy investor. "Welcome to the Belmont Gallery," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Karen Monroe, the owner." Jamal shook her hand, keeping his expression neutral. "Jamal Washington," he said, his voice steady. Karen didn't flinch, the name didn't register. She motioned for him to follow her as she launched into her sales pitch. This gallery has a storied history, she said, gesturing to the space around her. We've hosted some of the most exclusive art exhibits in the city. It's a prime location with a loyal clientele. I believe it would be a fantastic investment for someone with your caliber. Jamal walked alongside her, his gaze drifting over the walls. The art displayed was predictable: landscapes, abstract works, and portraits that lacked the vibrancy and depth he had always sought to bring to the art world. It's nice, Jamal said, his tone measured. Karen's eyes lit up. Nice? It's a treasure, she said, eager to impress. With the right owner, this gallery could become the crown jewel of Chicago's art scene. Jamal suppressed a smile. It was almost amusing to watch Karen try to sell him on a space he had once been deemed unworthy to even participate in. Tell me, Jamal said, turning to her. Have you always been so selective about the artists you showcase here? Karen tilted her head, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. We have high standards, she said. We've always catered to a refined audience, so we can't take just anyone. Jamal nodded, letting the moment hang in the air. Then he gestured toward the corner of the room. I believe that's where I stood last time I was here. Karen blinked, her smile faltering. I'm sorry, what? The last time I was here, Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. I was just a struggling artist looking for a chance. You didn't think my work was good enough for your refined audience. Realization dawned on Karen's face, her cheeks flushing. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I remember you told me my work was too colorful, Jamal continued. And that your clients wouldn't understand it. Karen's composure cracked, and she stammered, I didn't realize. Of course you didn't, Jamal said, cutting her off. But now I'm here, and I'm not just an artist. I'm a buyer. Karen's face turned pale. Mr. Washington, I assure you, I didn't mean to offend you back then. It was a mistake. If I'd known. You didn't need to know, Jamal said. You should have treated me with respect, regardless of whether I was a struggling artist or a wealthy investor. That's the real mistake. Karen's lips trembled as she tried to salvage the situation. I've changed. The gallery has changed. We're open to all kinds of artists now. Please, give us a chance. Jamal studied her for a long moment. He could see the desperation in her eyes, but he wasn't interested in her excuses. I'll think about it, he said finally, turning to leave. That evening, Jamal sat in his loft, reflecting on the encounter. He could have bought the Belmont Gallery on the spot, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Why should he invest in a space that had once shut him out? Instead, Jamal decided to build something from the ground up, something that would embody his vision completely. His gallery wouldn't just be a space for art, it would be a beacon of inclusivity, a symbol of everything the art world could be. The next day, Jamal called his assistant. Let's keep looking, he said. I want something new, something fresh. As he hung up, Jamal felt a sense of peace. Karen's gallery wasn't his story anymore. His story was about creating a future where no artist would ever feel the way he once had. And he couldn't wait to get started. The sun streamed through the large windows of the Belmont Gallery, casting long streaks of light onto the glossy floor. Jamal sat in a leather chair across from Karen Monroe, who was perched behind her polished oak desk. Between them lay a stack of papers, an initial draft of the gallery's sales agreement. Karen had spared no expense in trying to impress him. A platter of fresh pastries sat untouched on a side table, and a silver tray held glasses of sparkling water. Karen's demeanor was polished but cautious, her enthusiasm barely masking the nervous energy in the room. For the past hour, she had been outlining the financial benefits of owning her gallery, pitching it as a cornerstone of Chicago's art world. Jamal, for the most part, had remained silent, nodding occasionally as she spoke, his expression unreadable. And as you can see, Karen continued, gesturing to a pie chart on her tablet, the gallery has maintained a steady stream of high-profile clients. With your reputation and network, Mr. Washington, I have no doubt you could elevate the Belmont Gallery to even greater heights. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. He let the silence stretch, watching Karen squirm slightly under his gaze. "You've done your homework," he said finally, his tone calm. Karen smiled, relieved. "Of course. It's important to me that you see the potential here. This gallery has a rich history, and I believe it's the perfect fit for someone of your stature." Jamal chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Rich history," he repeated, as if tasting the words. He let them hang in the air before continuing. "Funny thing about history, it has a way of coming back around, doesn't it?" Karen blinked, her smile faltering. "I suppose it does," she said cautiously. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tell me, Karen, do you remember the last time I was in this gallery?" Karen froze, her polished facade cracking. She searched his face, trying to place him, but came up empty. I'm not sure," she said carefully. Jamal nodded slowly, as if he expected her response. "It was about 2 years ago. I came here with a portfolio of my work, hoping for a chance to display it. You were polite at first, but when I showed you my paintings," he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You said they were too colorful. Too unconventional for your refined audience." Karen's face turned pale. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean what?" Jamal interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "Didn't mean to dismiss me? Didn't mean to make me feel like my work wasn't worthy of being seen?" Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken truths. Jamal continued, his gaze unwavering. "I walked out of this gallery that day feeling small. Like I didn't belong in the world of art. But you know what? That moment didn't break me. It fueled me. It made me work harder, fight harder, until I didn't need validation from places like this anymore." Karen's hands trembled as she clasped them in front of her. "Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry. If I could go back and change how I treated you, I would. I was wrong." Jamal tilted his head, studying her. "You're right, you were wrong. And now here we are, with you trying to sell me the very gallery that once rejected me." Karen's apology spilled out in a rush. "I've changed since then. The gallery has changed. I've made an effort to include more diverse artists. I see now how narrow-minded I was, and I regret it deeply. Please believe me." Jamal let out a long breath, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, he considered her words, the sincerity in her voice. But then he thought about the countless other artists who had likely been turned away from the Belmont Gallery, dismissed without a second thought simply because they didn't fit Karen's idea of what art should be. He shook his head. "I'm glad you've had a change of heart, Karen. But this gallery isn't for me. I don't want to inherit your mistakes. I want to build something new, something that reflects my vision, not yours." Karen's shoulders slumped, the weight of his words hitting her like a blow. "Please," she said softly. "Give me a chance to make it right." Jamal stood, his decision final. "You had your chance, Karen. You don't get to rewrite the past. But I hope you've learned from it. Maybe the next time an artist walks through those doors, you'll treat them with the respect they deserve." Karen nodded silently, her eyes downcast. Jamal extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she shook it. "Good luck, Karen," he said, his tone not unkind. Then he turned and walked out of the gallery, the weight of the moment lifting with every step he took. As Jamal stepped onto the bustling streets of Chicago, he felt a sense of clarity. He had faced his past and come out stronger. But more importantly, he had reaffirmed his commitment to the future he wanted to create, a future where no artist would ever feel the way he once had. His assistant was waiting for him by the car. "How did it go?" she asked. Jamal smiled, the answer already clear in his mind. "We're moving on," he said. "Find me a space where we can start fresh. Somewhere we can build something real." And with that, Jamal walked toward the next chapter of his journey, ready to create a legacy that would outshine any gallery in the city. The grand opening of the Horizon Gallery was a night Jamal Washington would never forget. Nestled in the heart of Chicago's vibrant art district, the gallery stood as a beacon of change. Its glass facade reflected the shimmering city lights, and inside, the space was alive with color and energy. Jamal had spared no effort in making the gallery a reflection of his vision, a place where art thrived without boundaries, where every voice had a chance to be heard. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. After walking away from the Belmont Gallery, Jamal had poured his heart and soul into building something that would stand for everything he had once fought against. He worked tirelessly with architects, designers, and curators to craft a space that felt warm and welcoming, with walls that seemed to embrace the art they displayed rather than simply contain it. Jamal's gallery featured an eclectic mix of artists, young and old, emerging and established, local and international. The one thing they all had in common was that their voices had often been overlooked by the mainstream art world. The opening night. On the night of the grand opening, the gallery buzzed with excitement. The guest list was as diverse as the art itself: collectors, critics, community leaders, and everyday people from all walks of life had come to see what the Horizon Gallery was all about. Jamal stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. He was dressed sharply in a tailored black suit, but his most striking accessory was the radiant smile that never left his face. As people wandered through the gallery, admiring the art, Jamal felt a swell of pride. Each piece told a unique story. A striking portrait of a single mother by a young Latina artist. A bold abstract piece, created by an autistic teenager. A haunting sculpture that reflected the struggles of a queer artist from the Middle East. Jamal had personally worked with each artist, ensuring their stories were front and center. Beside every piece was a plaque that didn't just list the artist's name and title of the work, but shared the story behind it, what inspired it, what it represented. The guests were visibly moved. Conversations sparked around every corner, strangers connecting over the powerful messages embedded in the art. A moment of reflection. Midway through the evening, Jamal stepped away from the crowd and into a quieter corner of the gallery. From there, he could see everything: the people, the art, the energy. It was everything he had dreamed of and more. "Quite the turnout," a familiar voice said. Jamal turned to see Lisa Reynolds, the woman who had first recognized his talent and believed in him. She was holding a glass of wine, her eyes sparkling with pride. "None of this would have happened without you," Jamal said, his gratitude evident. Lisa shook her head. "Don't sell yourself short. I gave you a nudge, but this?" She gestured to the gallery. "This is all you, Jamal. And it's beautiful." Jamal smiled, humbled by her words. Inspiring the next generation. Toward the end of the night, Jamal made his way to a small group gathered in front of one of the paintings, a vibrant depiction of a young boy standing in a field of sunflowers. The artist, a nervous teenager named Malik, was explaining his work to the group. "I painted this because it reminded me of my grandma," Malik said, his voice shaky but steady. "She used to tell me to always look toward the sun, no matter how dark things got." Jamal watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. Malik was one of the first artists he had mentored, a kid who had once been too shy to even share his work. Now, here he was, speaking confidently about his art to an audience that hung on his every word. When the crowd dispersed, Jamal approached Malik. "You're a natural," Jamal said, clapping him on the shoulder. Malik grinned, his nerves fading. "Thanks, Mr. Washington. I couldn't have done this without you." Jamal shook his head. "You did this, Malik. All I did was give you the space to shine." A closing speech. As the evening wound down, Jamal took to a small stage at the center of the gallery. The crowd quieted as he picked up the microphone, all eyes on him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm and steady. "This gallery isn't just about the art on these walls, it's about the stories behind them. It's about the people who create, who dream, who overcome. For too long, the art world has shut out voices like these. But tonight, we change that. he paused, letting his words sink in. This gallery exists because someone once gave me a chance when the rest of the world wouldn't. And now, it's my turn to pay that forward. My hope is that the Horizon Gallery will be more than just a space for art, it will be a space for connection, for understanding, and for change. The room erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the gallery. The legacy. In the months that followed, the Horizon Gallery became a cornerstone of Chicago's art scene. It hosted exhibitions, workshops, and community events, all with the goal of uplifting underrepresented voices. Artists who once struggled to find an audience now found themselves in the spotlight, their work celebrated for its authenticity and power. Jamal, meanwhile, became a mentor to dozens of young artists, guiding them through the challenges he had once faced. He made it a point to visit schools and community centers, inspiring the next generation to pursue their dreams, no matter the obstacles. One day, a young girl approached him after a school presentation. She held a sketchpad in her hands, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mr. Washington," she said shyly, "do you think I could be an artist someday?" Jamal knelt down to meet her gaze, his voice filled with certainty. "If you believe in yourself and work hard, you can be anything you want to be." As he watched her walk away, clutching her sketchpad tightly, Jamal felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He had faced rejection, discrimination, and countless setbacks, yet he had never given up. And now, through the Horizon Gallery, he was creating a world where no one else would have to feel the way he once did, a world where talent, passion, and perseverance triumphed over prejudice. It was more than a gallery. It was a legacy.